What's going on, everybody? The No Huddle Show here for our Tuesday reaction pod, and we're going to start things off a little bit different. First, Matt, how you doing? I'm excited to get into some reactions because we got a lot. We got a lot of reactions off our podcast from after the game.
Yeah, we really did. And it's kind of surprising, the reaction to our opinion on how things played out. And it's going to be fun to look back on that Bears game a little bit. But also, Eliot, we have to start turning the page and looking ahead, because these next two games, I know you wrote about it on Monday. We've been talking about this for weeks. These two games on the road against the Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams, they're going to define the Eagles season. And we're going to know everything we need to know about this team. We've talked a lot about strength of schedule, teams they've played, teams they've beaten, the caliber of the opponents. We're going to know everything about this team and where they're going to be for the postseason, in my opinion, after the next 2 weeks.
Agreed. So since we are doing a lot of reaction, the first thing, I have two things I want to take care of before we get into it. First, if you are listening, please subscribe. I sometimes forget to say that at the beginning of the episode, and I want to make sure I say it, though. We really appreciate it. It's a No Huddle Show, and you can get it on all your podcast networks, iTunes, all that stuff. So please subscribe. But the second thing is, there's been some discrepancy into what number of comments we want to get to, because we originally said 200 by the Cowboys game. We blew that out the water.
Yep.
We're at 270 right now. So I know Joe had thrown out like 1,000 or something like that. I decided the goal, and tell me what you think, I want to get to 300 5-star reviews by the Rams game. By the end of the Rams game.
I think we can get there. That's about 2 weeks. And the more that we have in terms of subscribers, the more people who throw some reviews out there. We're only 30 reviews away from that 300 mark.
I think we can do it.
I think I want to throw down the gauntlet of 500 by the first playoff game. And
maybe, but let's just stay with the 300 for now.
No maybes about it here. If we're going to set a short goal, we got to have a long-term goal. So please help us out with those 5-star reviews, those 5-star ratings. 300 by the end of the Rams game, 500 by the time their first playoff game kicks off.
So
that's the gauntlet we're throwing down.
I like it. All right. Speaking of comments, we're going to start off with our YouTube commenters. We appreciate everyone that listens on YouTube. Lots of comments this week on the YouTube page. 71 comments. I read all of them. Yeah, maybe there's like maybe one or two nice ones in there, but for the most part, the general consensus was we were being too negative in our post-game pod, and I think that's a good way to kind of talk a little bit about the Bears game. We don't talk about it too much because, like you said, I think it's time to look ahead, and they demolished the Bears. But a lot of people were saying we were haters. People were saying we were nitpicking. Here's what I would say, and you can go after this. Everyone's saying, well, we're focusing too much on the 11 penalties. We're focusing too much on the fumbles. When Doug Peterson was asked at his post-game on his Monday press conference what he noticed after watching the tape, the first thing he brought up was the penalties and the fumbles. So you guys can say we're nitpicking all we want. You can say we're being negative. The reality of the situation is penalties are a major issue for the Eagles. They're still top 10 in the league. Turnovers, not so much, but they did fumble it 4 times on Sunday, so it was an issue then. They won by 28 points. That's great. But they have to play a cleaner brand of football from here on out, starting with these next 2 weeks and then in the playoffs. So maybe it's being nitpicking, but it is what it is. They played a sloppy game on Sunday. They're just so talented, and the Bears are not good that didn't matter.
And I said that right out of the chute on Sunday, because you came right on and you pointed out that they're a top 10 team in penalties. You talked about the penalties on Sunday. You talked about turning the ball over. And I tried to, rein you in a little bit and say that they still won the game 31-3, and that the Bears just weren't a good enough team or a talented enough team to make the Eagles pay for their mistakes. But their next two opponents on the road in Seattle, which I think the Eagles are going to win the game, and we have plenty of time this week to talk about that.
I'm not so sure.
But still, on the road in Seattle and then going on the road to the Rams, which I think is going to be their toughest game on the schedule and their most daunting task between now and a potential Super Bowl. But I just look at what happened on Sunday. The Bears weren't good enough to capitalize on some of the mistakes that the Eagles made. And if you want to hear that the Eagles are going to go 15-1 and they're going to win the Super Bowl by 30 points and that they're going to win the next 5 Super Bowls, there are podcasts out there you can listen to. But we're going to give you the analysis. We're going to break it down. And I think it is telling, Eliot, that by the time that this thing hit the airwaves on Sunday night and by the time Doug Peterson stepped to the podium on Monday afternoon, all of the things you pointed out, all of the things that we discussed, discussed, whether it was the potential of getting penalized for a celebration, whether it was cleaning up the turnovers, whether it was eliminating penalties, all of those things were the conversation that drove the day on Monday. So if people are unhappy with that, that's just the nature of analyzing the NFL and analyzing the Eagles.
So the one thing, though, I will back off a little bit off the Sunday pod is I mean, the celebrations, look, I still think that eventually it's going to come back to bite them. Like, I can just picture a team doing the electric slide. And, like, let's say the Eagles are playing the Saints in the playoffs. And, look, the Saints are a good team. There would be no shame in losing to the Saints. Let's say the Eagles are losing to the Saints. The game's decided, and the Saints do the electric slide. Like, there are going to be the risky part of doing that. And, they can say it's about them all they want. To a certain degree, it is showing up your opponent.
But I don't even want to go that far. I think that the biggest concern, and Doug talked about this on Sunday right after the game, the biggest concern, in my opinion, and it comes up in conversation when people come up to me in Wawa, or I go to, the bagel shop I go to get a bagel. The first thing that people are asking me this week are, hey, what do you think of the celebrations? What's up with the celebrations? And I agree. I think it's fun. And I think around the league, you're seeing teams really get into it and have a good time. And that's all well and good. But I touched on this on Sunday, and you did as well, Eliot. My biggest worry is that you're going to draw a penalty for this eventually. And I know that they didn't show this on Fox during the game broadcast because my father didn't see it and the bagel guy didn't see it. But the Eagles defense, they threw the ball up in the air into the field of play and had to run out and get it before Nick Foles had a chance to kneel down. And I know it was the end of the game. I know it was out of hand, so they probably were a little overexcited and over-exaggerated the celebration. But you risk getting a 5 or 10 yard delay of game penalty there. And in a more critical spot of the game, a more competitive juncture, those penalties can kind of turn the tide of a game, or at least give your opponent that additional 10, 15 yards, whether it's after a turnover or on the ensuing kickoff. So I think it's fun, but I think that the Eagles kind of need to dial it back a bit to avoid potentially increasing the penalties, because that's a self-inflicted wound. You want to talk about a pass interference or a holding call, those things can be tic-tac penalties. But if you start getting penalized, and to their credit, this hasn't happened yet, but if you get penalized for, a over-exuberant celebration or a delay of game, that's where you can say that it's getting out of hand.
So this came out this morning. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to see it yet, but they always mic players up and they'll have sideline cams and stuff like that. Yep. There's this clip of Wendell Smallwood, and you can't see who he's doing it with, but he's on the sideline playing tic-tac-toe with one of the boards, the white boards.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah. So to kind of transition to the next thing I wanted to talk about, that's fine, not to rip on Wendell Smallwood, but I do think it speaks to, coming off the celebrations, you got Wendell Smallwood playing tic-tac-toe on the sideline. I think this team is in need of a challenge, and it'll be interesting to see how they react to it, because you watch and we only hear part of the sideline clips, but they're talking about what celebrations they're going to do. Wendell Smallwood's playing tic-tac-toe. They're up 24-0 at halftime. That presumably is not going to happen against the Seahawks. And I don't want to get into the Seahawks too much because we'll have a preview pod on Friday, but I feel like everyone's writing off the Seahawks. But just looking at their NFL their stats on NFL.com, top 10 in points. I mean, they're top 10 basically on everything but rushing yards on offense. And then on defense, they're top 10 in points, yards, passing yards, and rushing yards. So I know, part of that is because they used to have Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor, and now they don't. But the Seahawks are not – this is not an easy win just because they're missing a few players.
But you got to remember, the Eagles are 5-point favorites going into that game. And I don't want to get into too many of the specifics just like you. But I think that when people are looking at Seattle, they're looking at them just differently than we have in years past. Because in years past, you could get out the chisel and the rock and etch in that L on the schedule going into Seattle. But I don't think that the Seahawks have that air of invincibility right now. They lost a game to the Redskins up there, if I remember correctly. So you look at, they just haven't played all that well at home. They lost on Monday night 34-31 2 weeks ago against an Atlanta team that went out and punched them in the mouth early. But part of that success in running the ball, it's come from Russell Wilson. I mean, Russell Wilson's a mobile quarterback. We know that he likes to tuck and run it and extend plays. And, you look at what he's been able to do. He scored rushing touchdowns in each of the last two games. So I'm not saying that this game is a layup by any stretch, but I think that if you view it through the prism of these two games defining your season, I think the Seattle game is a much more winnable, more favorable matchup for the Eagles than the Rams game is.
Yeah, I mean they're both going to be tough.
Yep.
But I guess my counter is kind of I'm not trying to discredit the Eagles for their 10-1 start because 10-1's 10-1. I don't care who you play. Like you're 10-1.
Yep.
I mean they played Mitch Trubisky, C.J. Beathard. I mean they haven't faced good quarterbacks recently. So
hey, you're sounding like me. I like it. I like it.
Well, but I'm saying like Russell Wilson. You could say well some of the rushing yards are from him. Well they haven't faced elite quarterbacks. So
right.
my only thing is like I'm just going to be really interested to see how the Eagles react over these next 2 weeks because if they go 2-0, I don't care if they win each game by 1 point. Like if they beat both of these two teams in back-to-back weeks, then I think you can really 100% talk about them as a Super Bowl contender. I think they are now to some degree, but in my head, I still have a little worry about how they'll react to the postseason and about how that it's a different kind of ball game. I mean, Malcolm Jenkins talked about it after the game on Sunday that you find out a lot about these teams when you go into these type of situations. Torrey Smith said it too. I mean, these are two guys that they've both won Super Bowls, but also they've been in big road games. I mean, all the times the Torrey Smith would go with the Ravens into Pittsburgh. Like those are big games. And the Eagles haven't really played those games yet. I mean, I know they had Dallas last week, but Dallas is really bad right now.
Right.
So
I just one quick point on that because I know that we've talked a lot about how playoff tested or not this team is. I wrote about how Doug Peterson has really changed the culture of that locker room in such a short time. And one of the things that Chris Long talked about and Malcolm Jenkins and Torrey Smith and even LeGarrette Blount to a certain degree, there are a lot of veterans that were brought in here that do have Super Bowl experience. So I think that it's that coupling of a young quarterback who's a franchise quarterback, young players who the team has drafted and developed who are now contributing, on both sides of the football. But you have Torrey Smith with a Super Bowl ring in that room, Chris Long, LeGarrette Blount, Malcolm Jenkins. These guys know what it takes to get it done. And that infusion of veteran leadership, I think, mitigates some of the fact that this team hasn't gone into the postseason as a group, but there are guys that can stand up in those team meetings and say, listen, this is how it's different. This is how teams are going to approach you different. These are how the distractions get different this time of year. This is how much mistakes within a game get magnified in playoff games. So I think that while it remains to be seen how it actually plays out, I'm not quite as concerned about the lack of playoff experience because they do have so many guys that have either Super Bowl rings or lengthy playoff resumes in that room.
Yeah, I agree with all that. That being said, and we've both been very high on Wentz. I mean, I know you like Khalil Mack more, but like but I mean, that being said, if Wentz doesn't show up, it changes everything. So I agree with everything you just said, but the fact is their most important player on the team has never played in a playoff game, and that's a factor. But let me ask you this
real quick.
All right, go ahead.
Let me just ask you real quick. Have we seen this year? I mean, I'd kind of take last year and put it on a shelf because Wentz was still developing his skill set. The supporting cast wasn't what it was. He didn't have Lane Johnson for 10 games. But I was talking about this with my father after the game, and he was watching Jared Goff and watching Drew Brees as he was on the phone with me on my drive home. Have we seen and have you seen any indication that Wentz won't rise to the occasion in the playoffs?
Absolutely not. And I heard a stat this week that I think he was 5-0 in college in the playoffs. I have absolutely no reason whatsoever to think he'll panic. In fact, I think his personality and the way he stepped up in some games, even last year. I mean, the Ravens game, I think he started off slow in tight situations in the games, but he improved throughout the year. So I have absolutely no reason to think that. That being said, I think that's the biggest risk that if they lose. Like, I think that's the reason. That and maybe the secondary versus a good quarterback. But I guess what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is if Wentz plays the way he has in the regular season in the playoffs, this team is going to the Super Bowl and they'll probably win it. I think that's the lack of playoff experience and the unknown is the only thing holding them back. Not holding them back. It's the only concern in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
So let me ask you now. Do you think this Seahawks game, true or false, is the toughest game the Eagles will have on their schedule when they play it? From that they've played so far. So not looking ahead. When they go into Seattle, is this the toughest game they will have played so far?
I do. I think that when you look at everything in terms of going into Seattle, when you look at everything in terms of the matchups, the ground game, Russell Wilson, the best quarterback they've played, I think this is going to be their most daunting task.
I agree. And so to that thing, that's what I'm kind of saying. So if they win, I think it'll be an incredibly impressive win. I don't think I won't be sitting here saying, well, the Seahawks are banged up. I'm like, no, that's an incredibly impressive win. If they lose, I don't think it's panic mode or anything, but I do think then you start to say, all right, well, they lost a playoff game type game on the road. Let's see how they react in LA. And I wrote about this, talking about looking ahead. If they lose both these two games, things could get really interesting really quickly, and not in the way the Eagles like. I mean, I'm not saying they'll clearly they're going to make the playoffs, but I mean they could have a playoff spot locked up by the time they go to Seattle. But a top 2 seed is not as guaranteed as everyone thinks. If they lose to Seattle and they lose to the Rams, I don't think they will lose both those games. But if they do, then you have 3 losses, and I think you could looking at the potential of playing Wild Card Weekend. So in the video that the Eagles release after the game every week, where it shows Doug's speech and Malcolm Jenkins talking to the team, Malcolm said, "Look, this 2 weeks is about showing who we are to the NFL, and it's a biggest 2-week stretch of the season." So it is huge. I think anybody that wants to say, well, the media is blowing it up, within this locker room, they know how big of a next 2 games these are. So,
yeah, Eliot, this was the first time on Sunday that you had guys openly talking about getting a bye week, openly talking about making the road to the Super Bowl a more navigable road. So I think these guys are really starting to understand what's at stake here, and I think that they're taking that bigger picture approach that the media and the fan base has for some time.
So let's get into the tweets. We appreciate everyone that tweets us after the game. You can tweet us at hashtag the No Huddle Show or email us at the No Huddle Show at NJ.com. All right, this first tweet comes from at Liberty Cliff. Question for the No Huddle Show. Have we ever seen an Eagles team this locked in? I feel like during McNabb years we were winning but piecing it together. Consistent and nonstop right now. You want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that in terms of this era of Eagles football, and I'm talking about from Chip Kelly on, because I think that Andy Reid's final year was the first time I was really around the team, and my first year covering the team, along with you, albeit at different outlets, was Chip Kelly's first year. So that's really my baseline, because we can look at watching those teams, the McNabb years, but I remember Andy Reid, those teams historically would go on runs in November and December when they'd win 5, 6, 7 games in a row heading into the postseason. But in terms of just from week 1 through week 17, just a team that looks like it's on a mission, I think they might be unmatched. I don't know that we've ever seen an Eagles team this dialed in for this lengthy a period of time.
I agree. And so I can't really remember off the top of my head, like their strength of schedule the year they went to the Super Bowl with McNabb. But I do think people are really overlooking how good that team was. And because they were battle tested like to the core. I mean, I know they'd never been to the Super Bowl at that point, but they went to 4 straight NFC championship games, winning 10, 11 games every year. Like that's really hard to do. So, I think that, have we ever seen the Eagles team this locked in? Yeah, I do think those teams were extremely locked in. In terms of blowing people out by 20 plus points, no, they weren't doing that every week. But I'd be interested to see how much that had to do with competition, because Eagles haven't faced great teams over the last few weeks.
I agree.
So this next one, at Vito603NH, facts and results speak for themselves. The Eagles are for real, no doubt. NFL beware. And to answer this one, I'll bring up our old friend Mark Eckel. I was talking to him on the phone yesterday, and for those that remember listening to him and reading him over the years, he is the definition of an Eagles hater in some ways. I mean, he always had, a negative thing to say, and I respect that about him because he kept it real and he was never, riding the wave. I called him yesterday, and he said this. He was almost speechless to the point where he said, I don't know what to say about them. Like they're just really, really good.
Yep.
And if there was a negative to point out, I know Echo would have found it. And yeah, there are some, we're closer to the team now, so you can point to things, but the Eagles are for real. There's just no doubt about it. So I agree with that statement full-heartedly.
I agree. So let's go right down the list here. We'll go to at Delightsy89. Eagles running back coach Deuce Staley deserves some respect. The way he rotates his backs is quite spectacular. And by the way, love the show, guys. First of all, thank you. And Eliot, let me throw this one to you and get your take on this, because watching Deuce Staley over the last 2 seasons, and particularly this year when you have the running back by committee of LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, it's really almost speaks for itself how dominant this team is running the football. Kind of of as a reflection of Deuce Staley and what he's been able to do, I get the sense, and I know that maybe this might be a little bit of a leap for him. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that Deuce Staley gets an offensive coordinator job this offseason. I mean, there are going to be teams that are going to look to, pluck from the Eagles staff. They're going to be looking for coaches that know what it takes to develop a quarterback or build an offense. And don't forget, the Eagles interviewed Deuce Staley for the head coaching vacancy when they fired Chip Kelly. What do you think? Do you think there's a shot that Deuce could actually wind up as an offensive coordinator somewhere this offseason?
So not to sound like a hater, but no. I just don't. Just because I think when you look at, to me, what the job Deuce has done that sticks out to me the most is just dealing with the personalities in that locker room. But the way he rotates his backs, I think Doug and Frank Reich have something to do with that. And I think the running game is successful because of the job Jeff Stoutland does and the play scheming and stuff. And I'm sure Deuce has something to do with that.
But just look at how quickly they got Ajayi up to speed, primarily by having him work with Deuce Staley in the 2 days after the trade leading up to his first game and then that bye week. Again, I don't think that it's a sure thing, but I think there's a chance that when teams come knocking, he might get a look for a coordinator spot.
Yeah, look, I shouldn't say 0%. I would just be surprised. But that being said, we get to meet with Deuce basically twice a year, and he does have that like kind of head coach personality. So I think he would be I don't know if I should say he'd be good at it, but I could see how what he might have some strengths in terms of offensive coordinator and head coach. All right, the next one at Bittner Evan. Do we need to start worrying about Foles getting elbow soreness if he has to play every Sunday? All right, so that's the point. That's the point of the season we've reached. We've reached a 10-1. The only interesting thing with Foles, not to get sidetracked, is just whether he's back next year. But in terms of getting elbow soreness, no, I think they'll be just fine. But it is interesting to watch him out there because we talk about Wentz and how important he is to this team. Just very quickly, let's say Wentz goes down. Knock on wood, we don't want to see anybody ever get hurt. How do you think Foles would? How do you think Foles would do? Do you think this team, they're going to make the playoffs? So could they win a playoff game with Foles?
I think it all depends. I thought that they'd be able to win a playoff game against the Saints when I picked them to beat the Saints a couple of years ago in 2013, the last time they were in the postseason. And I think the running game and the defense is good enough to carry the Eagles across the finish line against a team at home, maybe like in Atlanta, maybe like a Carolina, whoever comes in here for that first game after a hypothetical bye week. But I think you lower the ceiling on this team significantly if Carson Wentz isn't the quarterback. I don't think that it goes to the fact that, they'd be underdogs in a home playoff game, but you look at an NFC championship game situation a whole lot differently, and I think you approach the playoff game in the divisional round a lot differently with Foles being out there. But with that said, I think that there's a good chance you're going to see Nick Foles play in that Dallas Cowboy game, and the Eagles might have everything wrapped up by then.
Agreed. I don't think it would be a situation where, like your boy Matt McGloin last year with the Raiders. I don't think it would be like that. But I agree. Obviously, Wentz is. He's MVP of the league, so clearly, if you lose him, that would be an issue.
From G Summers 75, Big V didn't seem to look great. Had at least 2 holding calls and gave up a lot of pressure. Very concerning going into the Seattle Seahawks game.
I disagree, to be honest. I know he had 2 holding calls, and I would disagree. He gave up a lot of pressure. I think he's played well since he's been playing for Peters. The Seahawks defense is still really good, especially on the road. So I would argue, it's concerning in general going against them. I would also say that Big V, although I'm not concerned, is probably the weak link of the offense just because he hasn't played a ton.
But I think it's also fair to say that he's improved every week since he's been out there.
Yeah, even last year he did. I thought, obviously he had a terrible first game against the Redskins last year, but I thought he played well towards the end of the stretch. And Stoutland said earlier this year when we talked to him that he's actually a more natural left tackle than he is a right tackle. So I think they like him a lot there. Honestly, I think he's your starting left tackle next year. I disagree, but I could see why there'd be reason for concern, but I disagree. He's not looked good. All right, next at Man of Steel 95. Should we be concerned how angry Ajayi looked every time he left the field? Interesting. So I didn't notice that. We don't watch the broadcast feed a lot of times. So I didn't see any close-ups of him. I could see why he'd be frustrated to a degree. He fumbled the ball when he could have had a touchdown. A lot's being made of what he made after the game, and I have all the respect in the world for Ray Didinger, but I disagree that he seemed mad about his touches. I think he was just mad about his fumble. That being said, obviously he has a reputation from Miami,
Right.
so I guess it's something to look towards. But
Here's
I haven't
the
seen anything
problem.
to make me think he's upset.
Yeah, here's the problem. I don't know how comfortable he is in a running back by committee, because I remember in the locker room at AT&T Stadium, I asked him point blank, because I wrote the story on Monday about how this might be the best running back group in the NFL, and that the Eagles running game, in addition to Wentz, is really powering this team and going to have to carry this team in playoff type situations. And I asked Jay Ajayi flat out, have you ever been in a situation with this much talent in the running back room? And you could tell his tone, and I know we're reading into a lot when we start thinking about guys'
Right.
tone of voices when they answer a question, but he said that this is just something I have to deal with. I like winning, but it's something I have to deal with. So, that kind of set off little alarms in the back of my mind, because you hear about what happened in Miami and the fact that he was kind of a me first player. You heard about how he might get a little bit disgruntled if he's not the lead dog in that running back by committee. And on Sunday, of LeGarrette Blount with the most touches at 15. So I don't know that it's time to be concerned about Jay Ajayi, but if you're looking for Jay Ajayi to be Mr. Warm and Fuzzy because he's part of a three-headed attack at the running back position, I don't know that you're ever going to see that until if and when the Eagles hoist the Lombardo trophy, and maybe next year he's the number one back on the depth chart.
And I will also say that, and we're jumping 15 steps ahead, but let's just say for whatever reason, he doesn't carry the ball a lot next week, and he doesn't against the Rams and blah, 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 and he does mouth off and it becomes an issue. Like, one, this team will not put up with it. That locker room is airtight. LeGarrette Blount won't put up with it. So I think that would be handled really quickly. And honestly, with how much the Eagles seem to be like protecting their chance at a Super Bowl this year, just from the moves they've made, the way they're handling things, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he actually becomes somewhat of an issue in that locker room if they just like send him home. Like,
yeah, it's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. I agree. But I guess the only thing I'm saying is if anyone's worried about Ajayi like ruining this season and becoming an issue, like the Eagles will not allow that to happen.
No, I agree. And you look at that running back room, and every day after a game, they're cracking jokes with each other.
Yeah, no,
right. And Kenyon Barner. You look at Corey Clement cracking jokes with these guys. So even within that running back room, this isn't the case of one bad apple ruining the whole bunch. If Jay Ajayi is going to be a bad apple, he's going to be a bad apple on an island.
That's what I mean. Right.
It's not going to derail anything. We're going to blow through at MRM5256's question. We appreciate it, but we already touched on it with the sloppy penalties, turnovers about the Bears, and it's not going to work against the Saints and Seahawks. But Michael Heidel 10 checks in. I'm on to Seattle. All the mistakes will be corrected from this game. Now is the true test for our squad. The long travel and the two playoff teams. This will show if we are champs or not. Eliot, I don't know about you, but I totally agree. I think that this is a 2-game regular season for the Eagles. You win both of them. You essentially clinch home field advantage throughout the playoffs. You split. You're probably in a good spot to still have home field, bare minimum a bye week. And if you lose both of them, then you have to look at this season in a completely different light, because you might be playing catch up when you come home to go on the road against the Giants on December 17th.
Yeah, if they lose both of these games, they will absolutely deserve to be looked at differently. I agree. I mean, that being said, if they win both of them, then I will say, I mean, I already think like they have a, I don't know, 45% chance of going to the Super Bowl.
I think it's higher than that, but yeah, we're on the same page. Yeah.
But if they beat both of these teams, then I mean that number to me will go up to like 75%, because then you're probably gonna have home field advantage, and you're at that point you're playing so well. Can you imagine if they blow both these teams out?
If they blow both of these teams out, Eliot, they're gonna go 14-2, and the only reason they lose another game is because they rested the starters against the Cowboys.
And they might even beat the Cowboys, honestly.
With Nick Foles and with Wendell Smallwood and Marcus Johnson, they might. But my thing is, if you win both of these games, then all bets are off. And I think that the separation between the Eagles and the rest of the NFC gets a lot wider. And I think that you can start to judge this team about where they stand against the Patriots and against the Steelers. Not that you can't do that now, but the Eagles will have earned their right to be called the class of the NFC, and it won't even be close.
So this next one we'll also kind of breeze through, but at Phil Phil H. Hank. Sorry, I can't read that name. Phil K.
Phil K.
Handros.
Handros?
All right,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
That's
Well, we
right.
appreciate the tweet, whatever your name is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Handros. Or
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah. Crazy
Handros.
and sloppy game by the Eagles results in a blowout win. No need to clean that up before the West Coast trip. Wentz is still masterful. Team is rolling and having fun. We agree, and I think we both agree with that. But here's right. I'll say there's two more things I want to talk about before we wrap up.
Yep.
And this is random, but this is the kind of hypotheticals I love. So I'm gonna say this right now. If the Eagles make the Super Bowl, they'll win it. I don't care who they play. I mean, barring, them getting there and Wentz being hurt in the final play before the game. If they go to the Super Bowl this year, they will win it. I believe that to my core.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
You
I,
agree?
I don't know if they go to the Super Bowl this year that they will win it 100%.
Yep.
I'm not quite ready to go there yet because I think that the Patriots are really good, and beating Bill Belichick and Tom Brady is a whole nother mountain you have to climb. I think the Steelers can really give this team a fight. I will say this, and I think that it gets me close to where you are. I think that this is going to be their best chance to win a Super Bowl because we can all talk about
Agreed.
Carson Wentz continuing to develop, and that's going to be true. We can all talk about, this team coming together and growing as a unit. It's not going to be every year where Ezekiel Elliott is suspended for 6 games and it derails the Cowboys season. It's not going to be every year that Aaron Rodgers is lost for the season in week 4 or week 5 and it derails the Packers season. It's not going to be every year that the Giants are irrelevant. It's not going to be every year that the NFC is going to be right there for the taking. So I think that if they get to the Super Bowl this year, this represents their best chance to win it. I can't say that if they make it there, just hold the parade the Saturday before the Super Bowl, because I think that the Patriots and the Steelers are really, really good. But I think the Eagles would walk into a Super Bowl as a 3-point favorite or 3-point underdog. I think they're really good too, is what
Agreed.
I'm saying.
So I guess a couple things off of that. One point that you made that I really do agree with is this is the Eagles' best chance.
Yep.
That I mean, and it's not even just the other teams. It's that, and we can speak on it because we're really close to the situation. But I think a lot of fans would say this and agree. This is a special team, just from the depth, the way they get along, the way everyone's playing, the coaches. I mean, this is a special situation,
Yep.
and it's going to be extremely hard to recreate next year. Not even if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, even if Ezekiel plays 16 games, just the team itself is going to be very hard to recreate. And I think that's something that, I remember the 0-1 Sixers when they lost to the Lakers, probably the most devastating loss of my sports fandom ever. I remember thinking, all right, well, they'll be back next year. And I'm sure Eagles fans, when, they lost to the Patriots in 0-4, all right, well, you'll be back next year. I mean, it's not always that simple. But so why I'm so confident they'll win, and, we can obviously, if they get there, we'll discuss matchups. I think that's needless to say. But, the Patriots won the Super Bowl last year, and Tom Brady's best quarterback of all time. But the way the Falcons really got after him was that pass rush, and let's be honest, the Falcons blew. They blew it. So it's not
right.
if the Eagles are up 28-3, I don't think they lose that game.
But that's last year's Patriots team. We factor in Brandon Cooks being there. We factor in. I don't think that Tom Brady was playing at a level last year that he is now. Even at age 40, this looks like the Tom Brady we saw in 2007, which was his runaway best ever season. So again.
Agreed.
I think the Eagles go in as probably a 3 or 4 point underdog in a Super Bowl against the Patriots. Now, it's not saying that the Eagles don't have a chance. I'm just not ready to anoint them as champions until you go out there and beat Brady and Belichick. And we can say the Falcons blew it in a lot of ways they did. Julian Edelman still has to make that catch. Brady still has to drive them down the field multiple times, and they still have to overcome a 28-3 deficit. You don't just blink your eye and come back. They were really good in that fourth quarter.
They were. I just think if the Eagles get to the Super Bowl, it'll be because they've kind of not let the playoff lights wear them down, and if they've not come small, and if they're playing their best football, which they probably will be if they get there, they're the best team in the league. And yes, Tom Brady's the best quarterback of all time, and I'm not comparing Wentz to Tom Brady by any stretch, but for one game, if they're both playing at the level they are now, Wentz is still really, really good. So we'll look ahead to that one. But I said this to Eckel on the phone yesterday. I wanted to get it on the record. If they go to the Super Bowl this year, they're winning the Super Bowl. I'm sure of it. So there you go. So we can play that back.
It's your Giving Tuesday gift to the fans, I guess, right?
When we're on the media float, the parade, I'll hold a sign up saying "Called it." So there we go with no huddle show logo. All right, this briefly, we didn't touch on this a ton in the post-game pod, but the Brandon Graham extension talk. Little interesting it hasn't happened yet because it seems like one of those reports that comes out and then within 2 days it's done. I know it's kind of only really been a little over 2 days, but I mean, briefly, your thoughts on the extension. My quick thought would be I'm all for it. I think, his cap hits $7.5 million next year. I think he's a guy you want to build around. He was voted a captain, their best defensive end easily. I would want to do it, though, in a way where I see his cap number go down next year. And I think that's probably the Eagles' thought process, where you give him a 3-year deal and then he's on the books for 19 and 20 and maybe $8 or $9 million. But next year you see that number go down considerably, save the Eagles $3 or $4 million. So to me, it seems like a no-brainer. But just want to see if your opinion on that's changed at all since the post-game pod.
I think you're right. I think that there are two reasons why you do this. You do it, number one, because he's your number one pass rusher. You've already committed to your 2 interior defensive tackles with extensions to Jernigan, extensions to Fletcher Cox, and you drafted Derek Barnett in the first round. So you're looking at Barnett to inherit a starting job or take one away potentially from Vinny Curry next year. You want to make Brandon Graham happy and whole, but you also want to free up some cap space. So I could really see them moving some money around so that they are in a position to re-sign an Alshon Jeffrey, so that they don't have to have draconian cuts to players that you might not have expected to cut. And I know you went into a deep dive today on the site with the salary cap casualties that could be upcoming. So everybody should go check out that story. But I think that you do it, one, to make Brandon Graham whole and happy, 2, to lower his cap number so that you can tie up 1 or 2 other loose ends, such as an extension for Nigel Bradham, such as signing Alshon Jeffrey, which I think is imperative at this point based on how he's playing. And number 3, this team's foundation on defense is along the defensive line. You can make a case that they have the 2 best defensive tackle duo in football. Yep. You solidify that by having dominant defensive ends. You want to talk about winning multiple Super Bowls. You want to talk about keeping a team in the playoff race every single year. In addition to having the quarterback, you have to be dominant on both lines. They are on the offensive line, and they certainly would be for a very long time along the defensive line if you keep Brandon Graham here.
Agreed. All right. Well, if that extension is signed, we'll probably do an emergency pod and really get into it all. But we're going to wrap.
Pod.
Yeah, my favorite type of pod. Except for the ones where I'm right. Those are my other favorite types of pods. But all right. So we're going to get into. We'll wrap this up, and I said at the beginning briefly, but I couldn't remember the names of all the sites we're on, so I wanted to say it. If you've listened this far, please subscribe, especially if you're on YouTube. We appreciate the thumbs up. We appreciate the comments, but go subscribe. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. And when you do, please leave those 5-star reviews. We have 2 goals now, 300 by the end of the LA game, and Matt wants 500 by the first playoff. So that'd be pretty sick if we can make that happen.
We can get there. We can get there.
I believe. All right, so everyone go subscribe. Leave us those 5-star reviews. We appreciate it. And Matt, I will talk to you on Friday for our preview pod of the Seahawks.
Talk to you Friday.